Welcome back to the Shades of Green radio show on KDWN, 720 AM in Las Vegas. We're talking today with Scott Shaw and Dan Turner from One Sun Solar, as well as Rick Gilliam, Program Director of Regulatory Policy for Vote Solar, about the rooftop solar industry in Nevada. And coincidentally, there's a trade show at Mandalay Bay Convention Center called Solar Power International, where we have people gathered from around the world to talk about these issues worldwide, I guess, basically. So basically, when we were talking last segment about the gold rush in the rooftop solar industry here in Nevada during 2014, and that brought a great amount of new jobs into that industry, but also there were some kind of fly-by-night issues and some other fallout from that sudden surge in demand as we approach this 3% cap in regulated installations for rooftop solar. Can you talk about some of that as for this segment?
I think, like we were talking about in the past segment, the sort of perfect storm where solar really took off here in southern Nevada, with that also came a lot of yahoos from out of state, upstarts that didn't have contractor's license, didn't have business licenses in some cases, that you're going to have in any industry that, suddenly takes off.
Logarithmic growth.
and you had a lot of consumers that weren't educated,
right,
or they weren't educated correctly.
And then they were being faced with sales contracts that they may not have understood clearly. Yeah.
Exactly, that they didn't know, okay, what's this? What am I actually getting on my roof? That was one of the problems. Another problem, I wouldn't call it a problem, a challenge, was you had a lot of people were going solar at that time. So you had the permitting departments at the City of Henderson, City of Las Vegas, Clark County, got overwhelmed with applications.
Right.
Along with NV Energy, they had their issues because now all of a sudden they've got 500 applications a month when they were used to maybe 30 to 50.
Right, and that also not just administrative paperwork, but also they had to go out and inspect each site individually, right?
Correct. So that created a delay in customers actually getting their systems turned on. It went from about 2 weeks to about 2 months.
Wow, yeah.
So, I mean, there were some challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as any industry experienced explosive growth like that, but it was really booming and rolling. So how, I guess 2015 rolls along and that cap's approaching, and so how did our Nevada State Legislature respond to that about, the cap? Should they lift it or should they do something to kind of mitigate those changes before they happen? It was rolling so fast, I think it kind of caught them off guard. And our Nevada State Legislature only meets for about 6 months every 2 years, so I think they were kind of unprepared for it. What do you think, Rick?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in 2015, on the very last day of the session, the legislature passed a bill called SB 374, which did a number of things, but most importantly, it gave the PUC the authority to go in and take a close look at net metering and whether or not that policy should be changed. And this was largely driven by Nevada Energy. So the PUC did that, and in a sense, the rest is history, as we've kind of all lived through. The PUC radically changed that policy and really drove a lot of the businesses either to very low levels of operation or in some cases drove them back out of state. And roughly 95%, maybe more, of the industry, of the applications fell off a cliff that January or February of 2016.
Right.
Yeah. I would say it wasn't only the out-of-state companies that were affected. There were local companies, quality local, family-owned companies that together probably employed, almost 1,000 people.
Wow.
That literally went bankrupt overnight.
Mm-hmm. And basically, what was that PUC decision at the time? It sounded like they were raising connection fees to the grid by 3 times over as soon as 4 years initially, and then also dropping the rebate or the credits that people would get for their excess energy to going back to the utility by as much as dropping down to 1/4 over 4 years. That was eventually kind of challenged and extended to 12 years, and then the folks that originally had invested in rooftop solar were not were going to have to face those changes where their systems were becoming liabilities instead of assets. So there was further legislation during 2016 that grandfathered in those people that had already installed their systems up until the PUC decision, and to try to mitigate the fallout on those people that made a good faith investment. So basically, as 2017 rolled around, Assemblyman Chris Brooks, who we talked to on our first show here, had been with the solar industry, and he campaigned on basically trying to change that to make that right. So what kind of happened in 2017 legislature that you saw from Vote Solar?
Yeah, okay. Well, without getting too far into the weeds here, the decisions in 2015 increased the fixed charges that everybody had, or that I should say, solar customers had to pay, and reduced the energy
compensation,
offset, essentially, that you would get. So what the legislation in 2017 did, and it was very clear, it said this legislation is to immediately restore net energy metering in Nevada, which it did. Now, when Nevada Energy submitted their application to the commission to implement the terms of that legislation.
That was in June or end of August. I think the law went into effect on June 15th. Right.
And they submitted actually at the end of July.
Okay. Yeah.
And when they submitted, they, in my view at least, really misinterpreted what the intent of AB 405 was. And so they tried to retain as much of the old policy that hurt the solar industry as they could. And ultimately, the commission rejected that perspective on rates and on the netting operation, and has essentially kicked the rates part of that into the current rate case that's going on for Nevada Power Company.
And that decision was made on September 1st of this month, actually just a week and a half ago. Yeah,
that's right.
That's something. Right. So getting back into Assembly Bill 405, could you talk about that a little bit
just
more?
Just to back up to that real quick, what NV Energy did when they filed with the PUCN back the end of July was they proposed to increase the basic service charge on all customers, whether you're solar or non-solar. And the PUCN essentially said dead on arrival, but that will be going forward in the rate case that's currently being heard by the PUCN.
Okay, so
that's still going to be part of that.
Right, it'll still be discussed and worked out to become a revised law down the road. Yeah. So just a little more detail on Assembly Bill 405, how they tried to change that back. I think basically restored net energy metering, but there was also a provision in there that they called the Consumer Solar Bill of Rights. And so some of the problems we talked about during the gold rush years of fly-by-night operators and faulty installations, they tried to address that through that bill as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that was a very good part of the bill that quality installers and people that wanted to see that everything was transparent. During the gold rush, there were contracts all over the place, all over the board. Customers didn't really know what they were getting. So what this legislation does is it gives a 12-point basis on what has to appear and be transparent in every contract signed by any customer going solar and by any company presenting a contract to a solar customer.
And how can a consumer find those 12 points or that list of points that should be in their contract?
I believe that's available on the PUCN website. It's also available at the SEIA website, which is the Solar Energy Industries Association website.
That's great. And then what recourse does a consumer have if somebody comes in and does a faulty job on the roof, damages the roof? How can they get recourse to the company that did the faulty installation?
Most importantly, you want to make sure you're dealing with a solar company that has a contractor's license number. If you are, your recourse is through the state contractors board.
Very good. Thank you. We'll be right back for our fourth segment and Shades of Green.